So, as I have been telling some of you, I get to be Dave today. That's pretty awesome. And I had somebody mistake me for Wendell Loewen, so man, I am moving up. I even got hair.
Yeah, I have hair.
Okay, yeah, well, just not.
It's really short.
Yeah, it's really, really short. So what Dave asked me to do today was kind of facilitate some discussion. We've talked in Sunday school in the last 6 weeks or so about the cultural view of the family and the biblical view of the family and the cultural view of education and the biblical view of education. And I hope you got Rob's got some sheets back there for you for some discussion questions. And Dave asked me to lead a discussion on, something about the family and something about education. So I'm going to use the structure that he used. So most of the time, we're going to have a time of discussion around the questions. Then I'm going to ask for some response from you. And I didn't get the answers. He didn't give me the teacher manual, so I didn't get the answers to go along with the questions. So, but I'd like us to talk about these discussion questions in your group. So like he has had you do recently, I want you to group up in groups of 3, 4, 5, etc. And talk about, first of all, we'll just start at the top of the page there. We'll be talking about family. So the first question, in our culture, children are viewed as a liability. In biblical culture, children are viewed as an asset. For somebody like me who's got a background in business, and those of you that have a background in business, you recognize those terms, assets and liabilities. After all, the kingdom of God belongs to such as these, it says in the Bible. How do these views collide, especially considering the issues of family planning and abortion? So, that is a question for you to discuss. So, become a collective of 3, 4, 5. Answer that question. Then I'm going to ask for your response in about 5 minutes or so. And then we'll move on. Okay? Go. So I'm going to give you a 60-second warning. So what did you come up with? Are children an asset or a liability? Yes. Okay. Well, okay, I think we're talking about within the family to the parent. Do parents as a group, many of you are parents, see your children as an asset or a liability? Let's talk about economic. Are they an asset or a liability? Come on, parents. They're a dang liability. Sorry, they're a liability. Right? They cost money. Right?
In spite of child tax credits.
Oh, yeah. Well, the government wants to give us more money because we have children, you know. Well, okay. How about emotionally, Wendell? What do you think? Sometimes they're an asset, yes. When we're proud of them, they accomplish things. They do things that are cute. They do things that are, oh, wow, that's awesome. And then when they say things and do things that don't make us happy, they're a liability, right? Why is it that cultures around the country, some have many children and some have very few? In Europe, right now, one of the reasons why they have such open borders in Europe is because they don't have enough children.
The cost of raising a child has gone so high.
Oh, yes.
Generations.
You know what? This is something that's really bugged me. You have to buy like 6 car seats in the life of a child. And you can't use them for the next one because they're not good anymore. Oh, man, I tell you what, you got to, you know, man, I used to ride in the back window of the car. How did I ever survive? Right? Yes, yeah, exactly. Don't ride in the back of a pickup. My grandson wanted to go to the compost pile. We put up corn yesterday, so we had corn cobs and silks and stuff, and so he wanted to go with me. So he wanted to ride in the back, and his dad said, "Well, in town, you better not ride in the back." Man, I rode in the back of the pickup all the time. Well, we digress when we talk about that, right? Abortion has killed 1 million kids in our country over the past since Roe versus Wade. 1 million a year, right? And almost all of those, I would say, are convenience. I don't want a child now. It'll put a kink in my life if I have a child now. So we use it mostly for, as birth control. So, and we call it, we try to justify by saying, well, but if we brought this child into the world, you know, they're just going to end up in jail. They're just going to end up being poor. I can't take care of them. I'm too young. Oh, and that's on the mother's side. On the father's side, it's I don't want to take responsibility for what I did. So a sad commentary on our culture. All right, let's go on to the second. Did any of you go on to the second question? Yeah, let's do. The main unit of the family is a covenant union between husband and wife. The children are intended to be a physical expression of that covenant union. Now, I'm just reading Dave's definition here. How can the church be redemptive to children of family patterns that don't follow the biblical model? When I recruit track athletes to Tabor, I almost never talk about family anymore, because every team in every sport gets together, has a little huddle, family. And I have seen some of the most dysfunctional families come out of those huddles. What does that mean? And then how do we define family? That has been completely redefined in the last, 10, 15 years. So we have in the church now a lot of different families. Families don't look like a mom and a dad and a bunch of kids, or a few kids, or a kid. What does the church do about that? Do we just kind of look the other way?
I think things like VBS and weekday programs are so important to bring those kids in, because they're looking for family. They know in their heart.
Our 30-year-old adopted daughter, she wants to be part of the family. She talks about it all the time. She wants to be in our family, because she doesn't feel like she's a part of anybody. And we're glad to have her.
I think it is something that is in all of us. We want to be part of a family. We want to feel like we're valued by somebody. I'm going to digress or move away from this. How does a single person feel if we say that that's kind of a unique thing to everybody? How does a 30-something single feel part of a church family?
It's probably pretty lonely.
I can tell you that knowing some of those people, they feel somewhat like a retired person. The church believes that they've had all this time, and you could ask them to do whatever because they got nothing better to do. So they can't say no to anything because they can't use little Johnny or little Susie as an excuse.
We had a discussion about this situation when it turned out that of our three children, two did get married and have children, and our middle child, our oldest son, remained and remains a bachelor and into his 50s. And I asked him on the phone not very long ago, I said, Brent, does your church minister to you as a Christian who is not married and doesn't have a family? And he said, well, I can say yes. He worked at it, and his church worked at it, but he wasn't always able to say that throughout his bachelorhood life. At times, he felt fitting in with the general culture. Um, he was open to that, but it just didn't click. So I think as a church here, we can easily go out of our way to connect with anyone who may feel isolated like that.
There's also another group of people that the church in general is losing. I had a discussion with one of my children here yesterday. That is the Gen Z family. The 24 to 34 group. He asked me, he said, so what does a church do to attract that family? One of the answers is you provide services for that group of people.
I think what happened is COVID hit. They didn't have nursery anymore, didn't have Sunday school anymore. These parents couldn't come with their kids because they couldn't walk into a church and have a handful of kids. And now it's easier to stay home because they're in their routine. And a lot of those services haven't started in a lot of
Right, yeah. And those of you that have had children that you took to church, you find it really hard to have any kind of spiritual experience when you're wrestling with a child that's 3 or 4 or 5 years old that doesn't really understand yet how to sit quietly and listen.
I think it's a challenge, and we walk a fine line as the church, because some of me feels uncomfortable about putting on something that will just attract them, because I think we need less of that and more of Jesus. Like that, Jesus should be what's drawing them. And so I don't know. I just struggle with this, and I'm not saying I have any good ideas or answers. I'm just saying that group is maybe looking for experience, or I don't know how to say it. Oh, that I don't know.
Entertainment.
Entertainment, yeah, that's a good word. Ryan disagrees. But anyway, that's just hard. It's just hard to know our place and hard to know what can we do. I know to bring them in the doors, but also can that age group still be connected to other believers, that it doesn't look like it does in here on Sunday morning?
So how I tried to answer that was evangelism happens not at events. Evangelism happens person to person.
And same with discipleship.
Yeah, it happens individual to individual. And so maybe motivating us as the church to be personally involved enough with somebody, whether it's a non-Christian or a Christian who has just gotten in the habit of, COVID. It's just easy to, I drive by the golf course coming to church every day. This is like, okay. I could be out golfing. I remember being in Christian service and going to a men's Bible study on a Saturday morning and making the statement that I never even thought about going to church on Sunday. And the guy beside me looked at me and he said, "What?" I mean, there's so many things I do on Sunday. I mow the lawn. I go fishing. I play golf. And if you really want to be kind of semi-spiritual, I have family time on Sunday because I don't have to go to work. It just stuck with me like, well, okay. I'll I'll kind of end this thing by saying, and this is what I think, so you can take it or leave it. I think when we think that the church's job is to provide, is to do evangelism, and we don't have to, personally, we're going to struggle, because it is not the habit of our culture to go to church. It might have been a couple generations ago. Everybody went to town. It was good business to be in church. It was socially good to be here for your reputation in the community. And having lived in the city where you never see anybody at church ever during the week, who would know? Right? All right, let's go on to the next one here. How about number 3? Discuss the church's role in supporting children in the following 3 situations: adopted children, single-parent families, children of divorced parents, or troubled marriages. I'm going to let you have in your group a little time here, okay? So let's look at those three things, okay? You guys want to? I'm having lunch. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Oh, you got one of these?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, all right. I was going to invite you to come up, but I.
Culture doesn't make as much distinction now as it did a few generations back between naturally biological children and adopted, which is probably a good
60-second warning. Okay. You looked at or briefly discussed 3 different kinds of children. Let me start by asking, should children in general be segregated based upon what these 3 different family situations, the needs that they have being different, or are the needs different? Or should we just lump all the children together and treat them all the same? What do you think?
David, when you first started out, I went to that segregation part of it. I think that as we look at these 3 different types of children, the foundation of racism builds right there to me when we start to think about them differently. I think we can't treat all of the kids the same because our own naturally born children in our family are different from one another. They get treated fairly. They're different, they need different things, but I think when we talk about these sorts of classifications, I begin to think, I'm going in the wrong direction for that. I want to think about inclusion. That child is included in a family. And I watch my neighbors, how they work at trying to have Claudia be part of the family, part of the church family, part of the community family, and engaged in things that are important to training a child to grow up in the Lord. And I think that we need to think about how do we do that as opposed to what I'm really saying is we need to encourage those parents with children that fit these categories in a way that they should feel supported in that set of circumstances.
As we look at these families, we have to also remember that these kids have experienced trauma that regular kids have not. So in a Sunday school class, they will react differently than regular kids. As we approach them, as they respond to things, sorry, this is my high horse. I've been foster care and I
No, that's okay. Those are hard questions that churches like Parkview need to deal with. And we have in our church a number of families that that fall into all these three categories. I think what Dave was getting at by dividing them, and I think there's value in both of what has been said here, right?
I'm not disagreeing.
Oh, no. But I think the approach would be different, right? Everybody's treated the same, right? But if everybody's treated the same, we don't see the need, right? Take a cookie cutter approach to it and say, well, we don't recognize the need of a child personally coming out of a family, and then we don't recognize the need of the family. How do we address that? This is where the church needs to fill in the blanks for families, for children, and each one of these that he identified here, each one of these groups, I think you could say have very similar problems, or very similar, maybe not problems, needs that aren't being met or need to be met. That a child of a mom and a dad who love their kids, who are raising them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, don't have. And it's kind of built in. You know, I have for many years just held up people who would adopt a child as somebody that I have a lot of respect for, because they have to deal with issues that I don't have to deal with. I don't even think about certain things. I have a way that my children are raised, and surely, yes, they're all of my kids are different. Oh my goodness. But there were things that I don't even think about when it comes to my own discipline or expectations, or, you know, what do you do with a child who, you know, they grow up, Hillsboro, Kansas, and then they get to be 16, 17 years old, and they want to know, who am I? Who was I? Why do I look different than all my brothers and sisters? And in that, I think there's some real hurt. Wait a minute. That I know that the parents that have raised them love them just like their own. But it's not the same. So our job as the church seems to be that we need to support the families. We need to understand the differences of how we approach different people. And I think, especially elementary school teachers, you really, well, teachers in general, I mean, that has been something that has been part of your education, as part of our, we're supposed to be able to recognize differences in our, how kids learn in our classroom and identify those kinds of things. But how do you deal with a child who came and just got beat before they got to school, or couldn't wait to get out of the home because maybe they're not getting abused personally, but they just live in a situation where it is toxic between mom and dad, and there is just constant back and forth. And again, I'm not talking necessarily about extreme cases, but just dysfunctional families. I do think that there is a standard that, while we understand each situation and need to have patience, that we don't just say, well, that's just how Dave acts. You guys gotta know where he comes from. And that's okay. We're not gonna do anything about it. We'll just let Dave act however he acts. How to love somebody who we don't understand can be hard, for sure. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit to education. We got a bunch of teachers in here, so we should have some really good insight. Is it possible for a Christian teacher in a public school to teach from the core of the biblical model of Wisdom Schoolhouse? That's what Dave talked about last week. He gave that nice little diagram. You begin with the fear of the Lord. That is the Wisdom Schoolhouse. That's the biblical model of education according to what Dave gave us last time. You begin with that. You don't begin with reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's not the core. But is it possible for a Christian teacher in a public school to teach from the core of biblical model of the Wisdom Schoolhouse? If so, can it be done legally or within the spirit of the law of the land? All right, teachers, what do you think? Educators?
I think that's a lot of pressure. I think we need to not think of school as a school building, as a 8 to 3:30. I think it needs to be an all-day thing. As a Christian teacher, I can teach Christian beliefs through my actions. I can love on kids, but I can't do it by myself. After school programs, Sunday school teachers, moms, dads, volunteers, those are all part of a child's education. I mean, in the Bible, he taught to the thousands, but then he also taught to his 13. The learning was not just done to the large group. And when we talked last week, I didn't say anything, but I think sometimes there's this pressure that it's on the teachers to get it done. At school, get it done. It has to be done in school. It's not the parents' job, it's no one else's job for the kids to learn. That's not fair. So step up, everybody else.
And I think what you have expressed is what almost every teacher that I know would say, that it used to be just reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now you have to teach values, you have to teach careers, you have to teach sex ed, you have to teach what gender you can choose to be this year. You have to you're required to do all the things that used to be done in the family. And many Christian families can be just as guilty as a non-Christian family saying, well, you just handle it. Why? I think I know the answer to my question, but I'm going to ask you, why is that? Why do parents today dump that on the school and say, it's your job to teach my kid to be honest. It's your job to teach my kid to be on time. It's your job to be responsible for your own actions. It's your job. Why is that? Personal responsibility for taking responsibility for the child that you have created.
The team was teaching table manners when Kayla was in her class.
Table manners. How are you supposed to act when you eat with somebody else? I would suggest to you, being a business guy, that it's to a large degree economic. I don't know if Dave's going to address that when he talks about economics. I don't have time. I have chosen a lifestyle that I've got to support, and I don't have time.
And I know for me personally, it's exhausting. I mean, I just leaned over to Ryan and said, every meal we say to our kids, please put your feet in front of you. Not under your bottom, not behind you in a weird shape. And so it's just exhausting. And so I think a lot of
Yes, Beth.
How many parents don't even know how to do those kinds of things? I mean, not sitting as a parent, but, I mean, there are a lot of parents out there anymore who didn't have any kind of an upbringing, and so how are they gonna train their children when they don't know how to survive on their own and do the proper things?
So we should have more meals at the church where the pastor stands at the front and said, all you kids, put your feet in front of you and don't eat until your mother eats, you know, or something like that. Well, I can tell you that at least my encouragement of the children of mine that have children is that you have to be persistent. You have to be consistent, and it is absolutely exhausting. But this is what you signed up for.
I think kids strive for structure.
Oh, absolutely.
And structure is at school. We provide structure. But parents don't know how to create the structure in all the areas. And so it doesn't happen. And then that's where it goes to, well, school, step it up. You have to teach it all. And we can't.
Right. Yep. I'm on the teacher's side on this one. If it was just about reading, writing, arithmetic, we'd be a lot better off. And if they all came to school with a smile on their face and a breakfast in their belly, and yeah, that would be awesome. But we as Christian parents and as Christian grandparents, okay, so I'm in that category. You know, Grandpa is great. He feeds me chocolate cake. Spoil him and send him home, right? I love Grandpa. Every time we go to Grandpa's house, it's awesome. I'm just getting my kids back. Sugar them up and send them home. And it is one of the joys of being a grandparent, by the way. But it is also, as a grandparent, and there's some grandparents of children in the audience here, I think it is a responsibility. It doesn't quit with your kids to connect with your grandkids in a spiritual way and ask them about spiritual things and talk about spiritual things with them. Yeah. I think where Rebecca was going with this is that we started off, and Dave started off talking about the family. The family structure and the family itself is under assault and has been to a large degree eroded to the point where you got what Beth said. Well, the kids don't know anymore how to act. How are they supposed to teach their children how to act? But I don't think we can just throw up our hands and say, well, that's the way it is, and accept it. At least I'm sorry, I'm a competitor. I don't accept defeat and just say, well, nope, can't do anything about it. My answer is always, you got to work harder. You got to work harder at it rather than just accept it and let it go. Well, how do we work harder at it in the church? By supporting families, by supporting all the people in our church. That's the function of the church. The church isn't someplace to go get entertained and just feel good for an hour. And the church doesn't stop at the end of the church service. And the church, functioning as it should be the place where somebody who has a need that they got an itch that they can't scratch, they would go, but these people over here that go to Parkview, they have it. And I want it. And I don't know how to get it. So what do I do? Man, I ought to go check out, not necessarily go check out church on Sunday morning, but this person is willing to talk to me about this. our church, or we're talking about education, I, as a teacher, as a public school teacher, always could figure out, I was a high school teacher, I was smarter than those kids. I could get them to ask questions that I wanted to give an answer to. But I knew that there were a lot of Christian teachers that I taught with that were afraid as everything that, man, I better not say anything. Is that an excuse not to? Well, it's just not my personality. I just don't need to do that. You know, or I don't like being in trouble, or I don't like confrontation, or I don't like, well, boy, I might get into trouble for this. There is a risk involved. And those of you that know me well know that I'm a risk taker. I don't mind risk. And fortunately for me, I didn't have to suffer consequences for that kind of action. But it is still I think an educator can, hey, what do you think about this? And then the way you ask, the way you teach something, and I taught in the business department. Man, you wouldn't think there's anything in accounting or something like that, general business, that could actually make that work, right? Just like Dave, I run out of time. And I know that I teach I get a lead a Sunday school class where half of my Sunday school classes leaves like 10 minutes before it's supposed to be over. So when they start wandering off, then I know it's over. So you'll get the real Dave back next week. I think he's going to talk about economics. I can hardly wait. That's right in my wheelhouse. So I can hardly wait till that. So bring somebody back next week to be in Sunday school. I know Dave would appreciate that. Thank you for your participation.